Pour moi, le Mondaneum, c'est un espace assez unique au monde, un lien entre finalement le passé, le présent et le futur sur base de valeurs universelles assez incroyables.
Alors le Mondaneum, pour moi, c'est un centre d'archives et une formidable aventure liée à la volonté de partager la connaissance. Alors les origines du Mondaneum, elles remontent au 19e siècle à Bruxelles, on est à Mons aujourd'hui, et donc c'est cette volonté de rassembler la connaissance à travers des fiches bibliographiques et de partager, coordonner cette connaissance de manière internationale, de mettre en place un système de classement et d'inventer un nouveau langage, la classification décimale universelle pour échanger des informations et documenter ce monde, classer ce monde et le fédérer, le rêver de telle manière à créer cette formidable machine à penser le monde qu'est le Mondaneum. Les personnes qui sont à l'initiative du Mondaneum, eh bien, elles veulent créer une nouvelle façon de vivre, de partager cette connaissance, d'être citoyen dans le monde. Et donc, cette façon d'être citoyen dans le monde au 19e siècle pour ces personnalités, ben, c'est véritablement être dans l'acceptation des minorités, de mettre en avant aussi les femmes, de discuter de plein de notions qui, à la fin du 19e siècle, alors qu'on est dans un impérialisme féroce, et c'est un petit peu plus compliqué à mettre en place. Et donc, eux imaginent une nouvelle façon de vivre ensemble à partir d'un projet de société qui leur est propre et qui est bien utopiste. Et c'est celui qui est en lien finalement avec ce que l'Europe a donné après la Seconde Guerre mondiale. Il faut le dire, effectivement, il y a un thème qui est très très important, c'est celui de la paix.
Et donc aujourd'hui, le Mondaneum, c'est un centre d'archives et un espace muséal. Donc on a autant des missions de conservation, de préservation d'archives, de 6 km d'archives. Et puis c'est aussi un espace muséal dans lequel on fait des expositions sur des thématiques de société pour faire résonner ces archives et ces valeurs aujourd'hui auprès du public. Ces activités, on les veut les plus ouvertes possibles et on veut toucher un maximum de personnes. Donc que ce soit le grand public, le public de chercheurs dans les centres d'archives où ils viennent finalement consulter ces documents, des publics scolaires, des publics familles, associatifs qui déambulent dans le musée pour approcher cette matière et comprendre la belle histoire du Mondaneum. On fait des expositions sur des thématiques de société, des expositions temporaires, et on a aussi une exposition permanente qui s'appelle Machine à penser le monde et qui permet vraiment de comprendre l'histoire du Mondaneum. C'est un endroit vraiment à part, par sa beauté déjà. Quand on rentre dans le Mondaneum, on a un effet waouh, on voit le globe, le répertoire tout autour de soi. Et puis c'est un lieu unique par ses valeurs aussi, valeurs qui sont encore super importantes aujourd'hui pour évoluer vers le monde de demain.
Alors ce qu'il y a de bien dans toutes les expositions, c'est qu'il y a toujours des petits jeux, des petites activités pour les enfants, si bien qu'on a des enfants qui viennent et qui en ressortent avec une idée qui est peut-être toute différente de celle que leurs parents peuvent avoir, mais une fois qu'ils sont dans la cour, ils font des pirouettes et ils disent « c'est formidable ce musée ».
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, thanks a lot for being here tonight. It's really a pleasure for me to chair this session that is part of the EUNICE Weeks, where we will have a chance to share this wonderful debate about European identity with all our partners. And we're very happy tonight to have here a very nice group of guests that will have a chance to share their point of view and their vision of European identity, and even more important, on how we could improve it, which is obviously a major question when you try to build a network of university really working together at the European level. So I will first let each of them present themselves. That way I'm sure it will be well done. And then from there, we'll move to the first question for everyone. So please.
Well, thanks a million. Good evening, everybody. Thanks a million for having us tonight. It's really a pleasure to be part of this panel and to join you all online. Also a pleasure to reconvene with all the students and stakeholders of EUNICE. And so my name is Gabriel Berneville. I work for the European Commission, and I am the contact point for the European Heritage Label and the Creative Europe, the funding scheme of the European Commission for Culture, Creativity and related industries. And since the Mundaneum is one of our very active sites in Brussels and in Belgium, apologies, I'm a bit late. It was, of course, our pleasure and our aim to join this discussion and discuss how heritage can contribute to making and building and fighting for the European identity.
Thank you very much. My name is Vincent Curie. I'm the director of the European Heritage Label Bureau, which support and which is proud to have the Mundaneum part of the label, and which is a label that is includes 60 sites all over Europe. And happy to be here today to discuss about a very important topic on European identity.
Good night, I'm Stéphanie Manfroy. I'm an archivist here in the Mundaneum. I'm specialized in the inventorization of papers here and related to the papers of Paul Hotley and to the feminism, because we have 3 major topics in our archive center related to pacifism, feminism and anarchism. And the Mundaneum is member of the European Heritage Label since 2016.
Good evening, my name is Leila Mohib. I'm a lecturer in international politics at Université de Mons and Université Libre de Bruxelles. I wrote a PhD thesis on the relationship between Europe and the Mediterranean, Morocco and Tunisia. And I'm currently working on the colonial legacies in university education and the kind of pedagogy that can help challenging them.
Yeah. Well, so as it has briefly been said, and I'm saying this for all our partners when they have a chance to visit us here in Mons, this place is really a wonderful place, and that is by nature very international, because it is the translation of really the hope that peace will come from mutual understanding between nations, and that is at the root of the story of this wonderful museum that you will have, I hope, some chances to visit when you come and spend some time with us. So before going into more, so maybe let's start by the first question, and let's try to see what you will each of you define as identity. I was very surprised to see when I just tried to Google it the morning and say identity. I just type identity, European identity, and believe it or not, you need to get to the 9th or 10th entry to actually discuss identity. All the first things are basically about your ID and how you get a visa and stuff like that. So the idea of identity is probably something that really needs more attention. So please.
Well, I will of course start, and I will let my fellow panelists adding on my comments. So I think it's actually very relevant to gather us all tonight in the Mundaneum in Mons to discuss this topic through the lenses of history, heritage, and hopefully also culture. And I think you said it right, Mark. It's not surprising to me that ideas, visas, movement is actually the basis and the heart of European identity. And please allow me perhaps to start by quoting Umberto Eco. So the language of Europe is translation, and that's why it's so important to be here today in this Mundaneum, where we are actually translating and disseminating histories, stories, and knowledge to the wider public. So yeah, of course, let's start by 2 keywords: movement and translation. And in doing so, movement and translation, I think the key idea is trying to understand each other, like this geographically, by moving through the space, by withdrawing our borders and our barriers, but of course translation, making this first step, this effort to reach to the others. And if you go back to the Greek translation of Europe, Eros op, big eyes, I think it's something, empathy and understanding is really at the core of our common project. So adding on this very philosophical discussion, perhaps more operational and political point of view, we believe at the European Commission that heritage is extremely important to understand European identity and European project, first of all, as a gatekeeper of our common references, a gatekeeper of our common values, a gatekeeper of our common symbols, a facilitator, a way to understand, a mirror of our own identity, through which we can try to understand other identities, and again have this kind of empathetic approach, so doing the extra mile to the other, this notion of trying to understand the other person. And of course heritage is a reflection of our past, of the ongoing social endeavors and a compass to better devise and understand the coming, perhaps, scenarios. And European project, European Union, European integration projects, of course, a very fresh and recent political project, I mean, in the eyes of history. So it's extremely important to be able to build this common narrative of symbol. And we had one pretty prominent French historian, Anne-Marie Thiès, was reflecting on this topic of European identity, and she was proposing she was elaborating on a concept which I found quite interesting. She was referring to IKEA kits. So according to her, in order to make a cultural identity sustainable and efficient, we need to find those common, like an IKEA kit, having our common references, symbols, and common, I would say, values. So heritage is one of them, and the Mundaneum is definitely part of his story.
Yeah, but maybe if we talk, if I can jump, if we talk about heritage and symbols, I mean, this place is really a place of symbols. So maybe the Mundaneum has something to say about this link between identity and really heritage and really about symbols. I mean,
yeah, the Mundaneum has many things to say, and it's not easy to say in only 5 minutes. So I advise you to come to visit how we transmit how we share our storytelling and how is our vision of history, because Mundaneum is a special place to explain history, and history about knowledge, about peace, about the way to exchange, about the innovation system with the old furniture you see around us, with the universal repertory of bibliography around us. And also to answer to the question of identity, I suppose we have forget to show the movie that we have previously. Yes, and so is it possible to see it?
Sure.
I will answer to the question.
Sure, indeed. My mistake. I apologize for that.
The question of the identity of the Mundaneum is very important. As an archive center, this is linked to the question of memory, of the way to tell the stories, and this is very important in this period of war, to remind that that's a choice to tell the story on a special way. So it matters how we choose to remember in the society and especially in our archives center. And so the Mundaneum, with the 6 kilometers of documents and archives, is proud to explain a new way to see our common story. And so the identity, it's not easy to explain when you talk about pacifism, feminism, and anarchism. It's not a simple way to explain story. Perhaps you don't have an idea about pacifism. And if you are coming in the Mundaneum and if you discover the machine for thinking about the world, you will have your identity, but you will be part of a whole world, and you have a place. And this is very important to remind that an archive center is a place where you discover, when you are able to discover a new story and you can create it. There is many ways to create history and to meet each other with this. And so this is very important for the founders of this institution, women and men, to underline how we deal with it and what are the place of each person in this context. So in 5 minutes, this is very different to change your mind about history, to change your mind about an archive center and a temporary place of exhibition like we are. But we try to think and to think about the story and each member of this story. I hope that I answered to your question.
Well, certainly. But at the same time, I would say that here you're talking about archive and history, and of course it matters a lot. But Europe has been built after post-world wars, and at the core of the European identity is this idea of looking for peace through Europe. That has been a major issue. And so the question that we are facing now, especially with the context of so many terrible conflicts around us, is at the end of the day, how can we build a European identity that will protect this peace? So maybe we can have idea reflection about this.
Yes, thank you very much. And first, I would like to confirm the wow effect. When you enter into the Mondaneum, this is really a fantastic place. Well, when I've been invited to this conference, I did like you, so I went on Google to see, okay, what can I have on European identity, and I got something different. I got visual identity. And I will come back to that a bit later, because it makes me some indication. But first, why is it so difficult to define the European identity? I think because it's a fantastic process of creation, and Europe is a fantastic process that we are unfortunately a bit underestimating now. Because it's the first time, or at least one of the first time, that an identity is not built on against someone, or on religion, or on language, or a common chief, but more on our diversity. And that's fantastic on one side, and that's problematic on the other side, because it's how can you bring together people that are so diverse, and that when you promote this diversity, the concept throughout history of identity is like we have to delete diversity to bring one single thing through language, through religion, others. So I said, well, what brings European together? And I came back to the basics, so on the European construction, and I realized indeed that in the two first words of the 9th of May Declaration of Schuman is the peace. That's the two very first words, and I'm happy to have seen that, what you mentioned, Stephanie, in the commentary, and to come back to your point, is like peace is extremely underrated, or has been extremely underrated until, unfortunately or fortunately, it depends, lately, because now, unfortunately, we see what it means to be at war. And I think, and when you think about the 9th of May Declaration in 9th of May on 1950, so 5 years after the end of the Second World War, that's quite a big achievement, to be able to think about peace between 6 countries after the atrocity of the Second World War. And I think what we have to come back to the basics, and I think unfortunately, or let's take this as an opportunity, that now peace, I think people now see, because in many of our European countries, people didn't really value peace correctly, that we really put back peace at the center of the European identity, where people really show or understand that there is an added value of Europe through peace. And then the solution of culture is on how to create a narrative, a storytelling, and the Mondaneum in terms of storytelling is a fantastic place. So again, I advise you to come to see what it means, peace and storytelling and the European construction. Because what is missing, I think, in general terms, is the creation of a European narrative and European symbol. Mm-hmm. I will come back to that maybe a bit.
Okay, thanks a lot. I imagine, Leila, that as a political scientist, that of course you can relate to this idea at the same time of how the building of Europe was really a political project and a wonderful political project, but at the same time is also the source of many political frustration today, as in many cases the political will in Europe seems to be lacking, or at least not at the stage of I would say, the challenges that our continent has to face nowadays.
Yeah, and I would like to focus on this ambivalence. As a political scientist and internationalist, I really consider identity as relational first. So when I'm asked about European identity, I'm thinking about the relation of Europe to the world, to the others, and what does this relation to the world says in itself about Europe. Identity is who we are. It is changing, evolving, as we have said yet, regarding the peace and our relation to peace, for instance. It is determined by many aspects, and it is first and foremost, are relational. What do we show to others about ourselves? What image others reflects about ourselves too? In a very important text written in 1991, Old and New Identities, Old and New Ethnicities, Stuart Hall, a Jamaican British sociologist and the father of cultural studies, tells us about this relational dynamic of identity. But first, he begins by recognizing something that we have just said, that the language of identity itself is extremely important to our own self-conceptions. To live with ourselves, to make sense of our reality, we need a language of who we are. It helps us, says Stuart Hall, to sleep well at night. And I think that Europeans have been doing so since the end of World War II and even more after the Cold War. As Europeans, first, we share a common story. Political modernity, enlightenment, industrial revolution, great powers and also great conflicts amongst them. But after World War II, a rational decision to engage in cooperation to reduce the risk of armed conflict between Europeans, and after the Cold War, the European reunification with a sense of belonging and solidarity, east to west and the other way around. So, second, as Europeans, we also share some values. Progress and modernity would have been forged in a European context before spreading to the world. Therefore, you can find in the Lisbon Treaty and in the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the EU the list of the core European values, the values that make Europe who it is. Human dignity, equality and respect for fundamental rights of any human being. Freedom, rule of law, democracy, understood as representative democracy, with citizens entitled to political rights and a European citizenship since Maastricht Treaty. And third, as Europeans, we also share a common space. Since the creation of Schengen, we freely, most of the time, move, travel, visit, study, reside in any other European countries. But if we go further, and we can say that European identity can only be understood and defined by wondering about its relationship to another that is not European. We can wonder how this relation of alterity contributes to define the European identity. To quote Stuart Hall again, identity means or connotes the process of identification, of saying this here is the same as that, or we are the same together. But that structure of identification is always constructed through ambivalence, always constructed through splitting between that, which one is, and that, which is the other. So what do we want others to see? I would like to remind you those words pronounced last year in Bruges by Joseph Borrell, the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs. Europe is a garden. We have built a garden. Everything works. It is the best combination of political freedom, economic prosperity, and social cohesion that the humankind has been able to build, the three things together. The rest of the world is not exactly a garden. Most of the rest of the world is a jungle, and the jungle could invade the garden. So the gardeners should take care of it, but they will not protect the gardens by building walls. The gardeners have to go to the jungle. Europeans have to be much more engaged with the rest of the world. Otherwise, the rest of the world will invade us by different ways and means. So in a relational perspective, and based on the word I just read, Europe would be this garden, built on identity values, and others would be a jungle precisely because they wouldn't share the exact same values. So what kind of self-image Europe does project to the world? First, regarding history, the common history of Europe, made of political modernity, enlightenment, industrial revolution, is a history of extraction, colonization, dispossession for the majority of the world from the Americas to Asia. So we have to keep that in mind when building on this common history. Second, European common values reflect an ambivalence, and it has been said yet. And I would go further and say that they are spread, these values, to the world through diplomacy, through cooperation project, but at the same time, they don't seem to equally apply to all. And I would just take one example, is the different ways Europe, generally speaking, has treated the Ukrainian and the Palestinian crisis. And third, and it is linked to this second point, the common space I mentioned offered by Schengen, which is a space of belonging and freedom for most European citizens, is synonymous of death for thousands of people in the Mediterranean, the eastern borders of the EU or the Channel. So for them, Schengen is not the opportunity to move freely, but a fortress from which they're excluded. So in conclusion, I think that it's not about defining ourselves as European and constructing a 100% positive image of who we are, and it's also not about throwing away everything by saying that the values that make our European identity would not be 100% enforced or real. It is about constructing a common identity that enforces solidarity and belonging within Europe, while at the same time developing a reflexive, collective thinking and the relational dynamic of our identity, and engaging in the process of being, talking about ourselves without excluding or discrediting others. And I will develop this idea when we will talk about heritage, but I think that what you said about the history of feminism or anarchism, for instance, goes really into this direction.
Well, thanks a lot. And I would like to build on this to move to the second part of this debate on how can we really make it in for practical purposes, because at the same time, and I believe that many of the people who are watching us tonight do share this European dream that has been built around this idea of peace. But at the same time, we see that more and more around Europe, populist governments are emerging, and they are very often emerging partly with an idea of anti-European perspective. Not always, but very often. And so I think that for many people who probably have not experienced themselves the war, obviously, thanks to the peace that we have known in most of Europe until recently, it's not something very concrete. It's not something very obvious. And so the question would be a bit, okay, how can we make European identity, European shared value, something that is much more practical? One of the most famous program, probably, and one of the most successful program in education is Erasmus. Erasmus is known by everyone. You were mentioning Umberto Eco. Umberto Eco was dreaming of a program that he had named Odysseus, that was supposed to say, okay, not only students should be traveling around, but anyone between 18 and 25 should be able to be a taxi driver, a plumber. They should be able to work in different places so that they experience life with other people. And of course, when you know someone, you get more easily into sharing some things. Those who have had chance to travel and live abroad have all experienced that. So from a very practical point, what do you think would be your priorities to make this European identity emerging in a way that is, I would say, compatible with all the constraints that most European people are facing today? Sure.
Taking this one, and then we can open the discussion. First of all, Mark, to answer Umberto Eco's concerns, we can travel across Europe after the age of 18 years old and benefit from European funding. So for instance, you can benefit from the Discover EU program. Erasmus Plus is open to not only students, but also staff members, lecturers, etc., etc. And
but not plumber and taxi drivers.
That's perhaps an answer to your question, because indeed, let's not take anything for granted. I'm not sure that since the Schuman Declaration, we had only peace on this continent. If you go to the Balkans, they will have a very different understanding of this notion of peace. If you go to Eastern Europe, they will have a very different understanding of progress and capitalism. I think that we do not share perhaps the same grammar, and this question of diversity that you are raising, Vincent, is literally at the core of our dilemma, of our very thin equilibrium. How can we bring back those different voices? I'm not sure that we were trying to reach stability only through peace, but really through cooperation. And again, Jean Monnet was supposedly saying, let's unite people, not countries, although this can be discussed. Yeah. The whole particularity and the specificity of the European project is the fact that reversely to each and every member state building this alliance Our history is not rooted in a golden age, but really in the ashes of the 20th century. So how can we bring back those different, very controversial voices together? Also concerning, for instance, we have one very interesting project, the House of European History, and God knows that it is extremely difficult to build a common narrative around a common history, especially when you go towards the East. They have a very different understanding of what was the late decades of the 20th century. So perhaps to me, the first concrete point, and then I will open the discussion if you allow me, Mark, would be to bring back citizens and bring back people in this debate, and really to build a narrative that mirror their will, their aims, their ambitions, and their vision. And of course, if you want to spark change, you need three things. You need an opportunity for change, a framework. That's basically what you are trying to build at the European Commission, at the European institutions, a framework for action, legal, common grammar, tools, resources, but you also need a common vision, and a common destination, a common motivation. And I guess that we are extremely eager to encourage all of you, students, staff members, lecturers, to recontribute and build this vision. So my first advice, concrete point, would be to let's be vocal, let's be active, let's knock on the door, and let's make the plea for what you believe Europe should be. And again, we are standing at a very, very interesting crossroad between a fortress Europe that you have brilliantly described, and I think it makes a lot of sense to discuss this notion after the Dutch elections of yesterday, and of course, this garden, so-called vision of Europe. So perhaps let's look for a third way, and let's look for a more human and people-to-people oriented narrative. So very happy to discuss this notion with you.
Yes, I think what is lacking is two things. One is a European narrative, a real discussion on how to build a European narrative, showing and emphasizing our diversity, our even contradictions, and European symbols. Just a stupid example on the second, the European symbols. Who knows the figures or the illustrations that we have on our banknotes? Most likely, nobody. And honestly, I don't. So while, if you remember on the previous currencies, most of us, we remember at least some of it. But to come back to the European narrative, I think, yes, let's face our contradiction. Let's face our oppositions. We might disagree. It's okay. And that's, I think, the value of Europe. We can disagree. It's okay. But we need to have a common root, a common history, or at least a fil rouge, which shows our commonalities and our diversities. That's what all countries or regions, and unfortunately lately more authoritarian regimes are doing. They are building a new narrative because they have understood that to unite people together, they need a story. And if you see outside the EU, that's a lot of people, a lot of countries are doing that. And then to come back to the symbol, and I think that's where culture is key, because we have to show that the European identity is not just based in Brussels or in Belgium or in Luxembourg or in Strasbourg, if we take the three European capitals. But that's the motto of the European Heritage Label. It's like Europe starts here in the Mondaneum, here in the Bois du Casier, to mention another Belgium side of the label, or in the Schumann House, just to show that Europe is not just decided in Brussels in the European quarter, but Europe is being built or has been built all over the European countries. And I think that's what bringing back Europe closer to the European citizens, to show that everywhere you are in Europe, you are close to a place or to a site that has been part of the European construction is important.
Mm-hmm. Maybe.
As an archive center, the Mondaneum has a special position to explain story and to give an opinion about our history, our common history. It's not the story, an official story, it's the story of everybody. And each person has to be recognized in this story. And so the Mondaneum is a landmark in the intellectual and social fabric of Europe. And so with this, in the application to be recognized as a member of the European Heritage Label, we wanted to underline the role of the Millennium as a laboratory of peace through culture. And so the roots of Europe are perhaps in some places, in some hidden place, in some forgotten history. And so our vision about history is to explain where you can find the roots of Europe, of cooperation, of peace. And for example, the Millennium was created in the 19th century at the period of imperialism, of huge capitalism, and overall, women and men believed in a utopian society, in a way to create utopian solution to cooperate, to share knowledge. And so it was an attempt, not a perfect attempt, but an attempt to imagine another society based on democracy, on new way to represent of representatives, to let a place to the women, to let a place to the minorities. And so I think this institution or archive center has a huge proposal to look to the history and to give a new way to explain it and to compare it, for example, and also to give the voice to each person. And that's very important. And I don't think that it's important to underline only common things. No, we are different. And we try to make some exhibition together with other members of the EHL network. And when you work with a Polish country, you don't have the same sense of democracy. You don't have the same sense of socialism. Because we don't have the same history about that. And we have to recognize that all particularities of each person, of each history, and we have to respect that and to understand, to give a voice to each way to make story. But the sense that we want to give, of the common sense that we want to give, it's our own perception. And we are free to do that. And it's not necessary to have a huge machine that that doesn't respect each person. And that's important to give a place to diversity, to each person, to each testimony. And perhaps it's the perfect way to give the freedom to each other and to respect all the voices. It's perhaps a message of tolerance, but I hope that could exist in our world. And it's not only in the past that we can find that, and in particular bad condition we can build something good. Why does this example inspire our world? Mm-hmm. That's all.
Okay, Leila, maybe final word on that.
I don't have a lot to add to this because I totally agree with what has been said. I think that European institutions have made a huge work constructing a cultural, political identity in Europe by the flag, European anthem, and a lot of other things. European Parliament had a role too. We can mention the House of European History, but I totally agree with the idea that we need citizens to take this into their hands, because identity is first and foremost the one of the citizens. I agree with this idea of diversity, and what I would add is the importance to pay attention to subaltern stories or identities from the margins in Europe. And when I was thinking about this today, I was, for instance, thinking of the Roma cultural heritage in Europe that I think is really something worthy to share, to spread, not only to respect Roma people and for Roma people, but because if we have a European cultural heritage, from a transnational perspective, Roma cultural heritage is one, and most of the time it's considered as a bit at the margin of European identity and European heritage, but it is so central and shared in so many European countries. At the time of most European people were constrained by national borders, Roma people were not. So I think it's interesting. I also would mention the integration of the Belgium Migration Museum in the European Heritage Label site, which also is probably a way to open European identity and heritage to those subaltern stories and identities. And that's it.
Thanks a lot. Maybe there is a question in the room. If there is one, we'll be happy to take it. We have a few more minutes. I don't know if anyone has a question in the room for the people with us. No? You have your chance. Yes? Maybe take the microphone so that the people think.
Okay, so recently there have been some surveys for students, for young people in the European Union, and a surprising conclusion was that actually young people, they don't identify as Europeans. And why do you think that is? That we would expect young people to feel more Europeans than their parents, but actually they don't. Why is it?
Very challenging question.
So you go first. Well, to answer your question, and thanks a million for raising this interesting point, and to pick up on your presentation and comments. I think because a lot remains to be done, obviously, and it's up to us to build this common narrative, and also to look, perhaps, to be more frankly looking into why and how can we really bring back people together. And this is perhaps because they feel a bit excluded. Perhaps they don't, if to them, and coming from the Basque Country in France, a very remote area from Brussels and from the European capital, it's true that sometimes all of this political project seems a bit far and appears a bit far from me geographically, symbolically, politically. We used to say you can't be what you can't see. So to me personally, first point of answer, it's important to open the doors, to let them be part of this project. Not only to consult them, do you feel you're European, but how can we really involve you in this project? And this is perhaps, I think, thanks million for bringing the topic of the Migration Museum. Migration Museum, very recently established museum in Molenbeek, Brussels, Belgium. It's actually a community-led museum. So it's magnificent to see, it's wonderful to see how citizens, European people, can together build a common project. And this creates a lot of shared ownership, shared pride, and sense and value. So I think the question is, how can we re-involve those young people and make them part of this discussion? Multiple ways, in the legal, political, symbolic, and cultural dimension, to really involve and create more participatory mechanism in our democracies. A lot remains to be done, and I would love to see more diverse European sites. You mentioned Roma heritage, also Muslim heritage, other kind of heritage, shared heritage should be, I believe, a part of this label and part of our common narrative that we are trying to build. But thanks million for your question. Over to you, Vincent.
I would think of two elements. One is because I think the society now in which we are living in is more based on individual interest rather than general interest. We have the tendency now to believe that each individual, or the sum of individual interests, equals the general interest. Well, one of the first things you learn when you are in university or at schools is that this is not the case. And I think nowadays, for a lot of reasons, people tend to believe that the belonging to a group is less important than their own identity. I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong. That's just something that at least I observe. So first, the predominance of the individual interest over the group interest, which was not the case in the past. Before, you were first belonging to a group or the community, and that was your definition, or your social definition. The second, exactly on what our colleagues here mentioned, the migration phenomenon. I think over the last 50 years, approximately, Europe has changed tremendously with migration movements. And I think one of maybe the weaknesses that we have not addressed correctly, or one of the issues that we have not addressed correctly, is this new, I would say, identity, or this change of identity through migration. And that's, I fully agree with what was said before on of including new kind of heritage, new kind of topics related to this new movement of population and or to this evolution of the society.
I have an opinion about the reflection about the youth, and because we are an exhibition center, we welcome many young people, and that's interesting to see how they are surprised by the story that we suggest to discover. And for example, the last exhibition in 2022 was related to the story of women. It was Portrait of Women, story, some storytelling about women. And so the goal was to offer some models. And generally we offer models about hero and less about women. And so this is important to offer several kinds of models. It's not only gender model, I will say, but it's also model from professional choices for each situation, I will say. That's very important to tell stories and to give a humanity about that. And it's to start from a person, from a grandmother, for a grandfather, for a father. And this is always interesting to have this testimony and to have this way to see how they fight in their society. It's not a simple life, but it's always to start from a simple point of view. And perhaps you will interest people in their story, in their roots, and in the society. And that's very interesting to give models and several models and to imply people in the society very early with the example of parliament, for example, and to be member of that and to give them a place in the society. I think this is the definition of citizenship. Mm-hmm. And to start very early in this consciousness and this implication. And it's more political than historical, I think. Yeah. So.
Well, so if it's more political than historical, maybe the politician, scientist will have the last word.
Yeah, and so maybe I'll have an internationalist bias again, but I'm wondering if it's also maybe partly related to the place of Europe today. I have the feeling that between the end of the Cold War until mid-2000 and the failure of the European Constitution, all the debates around this European Constitution, and finally we just agreed on the Lisbon Treaty. But during the 90s and the beginning of 2000, we had this EU enthusiasm. And I just remember like being a kid and being a teenager in this climate that we learned that Europe was so important for all of us in Europe, learn about reunification and a lot of things. And I began university with Mario Tello, which was a great international relations teacher and Euro enthusiast, which was telling us about the importance of Europe and was so convinced that Europe was the only way to bring peace for citizens. But inside we had those debates about Europe, and outside the European Union could not obtain this leading role that it was seeking. And I have the feeling that since the beginning of 2010, the importance of Europe has decreased slowly but surely, and that national identities have been on the going up again, as we saw in the Netherlands, in France, other countries, and as we saw with the UK and the Brexit.
Well, I don't know if we can hope that this debate contribute to this revival of European spirit, but in all case, I want to thank everyone for taking the time. Would like to thank all our speakers of tonight for those nice intervention, EUNICE intervention, if I may say. So in the name of the University of Mons and of all our partners from Europe, thanks a lot for this evening, and we wish you all a very great evening. Bye-bye.